They thought the nightmare was over. But when the road stretches endlessly, and the darkness begins to close in, the truth becomes impossible to escape. The car that followed us, a journey into fear. The dry heat had been unrelenting for hours, pressing against the windshield as the endless road stretched into the desert. It was the kind of road that felt like it led nowhere, but we had nowhere else to go. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the barren landscape, and my throat felt like sandpaper. We had been driving for so long that the hum of the tires against the asphalt had become hypnotic, lulling us into a strange kind of trance. Then, like a mirage, a gas station appeared on the horizon. The sign was faded and worn, barely readable, and the lights that once might have illuminated it flickered weakly. I glanced at the gas gauge. Just under a quarter tank. We didn't have much of a choice. There wasn't another town for miles, and the idea of being stranded out here, in the middle of nowhere, was a lot worse than stopping at this decrepit place. As we pulled in, the first thing that struck me was the silence. No other cars, no noise from the road, just the occasional gust of wind that stirred the dust around the cracked asphalt. The gas station itself looked abandoned. Paint peeled from the walls, and one of the windows was boarded up. I could see the old pumps, rusted and barely functional, standing like relics from another time. There was no movement, no sign of life. I stepped out of the car, the air thick and still, as if it was holding its breath. My skin prickled, but I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. I reminded myself that we needed gas, and this was the only place for miles. Still, I couldn't help but feel like I was trespassing on forgotten ground, a place time had left behind. The door creaked as I pushed it open, a slow, agonizing sound that seemed too loud in the quiet. Inside, the dim lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the shelves that were sparsely stocked with dusty goods. The air was stale, the kind of smell that comes from a place long neglected. There was a counter at the far end, and behind it, a man stood. His presence startled me. He was tall, lanky, his face gaunt, with eyes that seemed too wide for his skull. He was watching me, unmoving. I felt a shiver crawl up my neck, but I gave him a nod, trying to act like nothing was out of the ordinary. I grabbed a bottle of water from a shelf, though it looked like it had been sitting there for years. The man didn't say anything. He just kept watching. His eyes followed my every movement, and it felt like they were boring into me, as if he could see more than just what was on the surface. My heart started to pound in my chest, an irrational fear bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. I brought the bottle to the counter, and the man moved for the first time, reaching for it slowly, too slowly. His fingers were long, almost skeletal. He didn't speak, just rang up the water, his eyes never leaving mine. The transaction felt like it took hours, though I knew it was only a few seconds. As I handed him the cash, his hand brushed mine, and his skin was cold. Far too cold for the desert heat. I resisted the urge to jerk my hand away. Leaving felt like a release, the tension in my muscles finally easing as I stepped back into the open air. But the relief was short-lived. I filled up the car, the pump sputtering as it worked. My partner stayed in the car, tapping the wheel anxiously, eager to get back on the road. Something about this place was off, and we both felt it. As I replaced the gas nozzle, I glanced back at the station. The man was still there, standing by the window now, watching us. The dim light inside cast him in an almost ghostly silhouette, his face pale and expressionless. I climbed into the car, the sense of urgency rising in my chest. We pulled away, the gas station quickly fading into the distance, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The road ahead was empty, the sky a bruised purple as the last light of day disappeared. I should have felt better, relieved that we were moving again, but something wasn't right. I kept checking the mirrors, my pulse quickening. That's when I saw it. Headlights in the distance, far back but unmistakable. I hadn't noticed any other cars on the road for miles. I tried to shake the feeling, convincing myself that it was just another traveler, someone heading the same way. But the lights grew closer, faster than they should have. And then, without warning, they disappeared. My chest tightened, my breath catching in my throat. I stared into the rearview mirror, but there was nothing. Just darkness. Maybe they turned off the road, I told myself, but the unease gnawed at me. We drove in silence for a while longer, my eyes flicking from the road to the mirror, over and over. Then the lights appeared again. This time, they were closer, much closer. But again, no headlights. Just the silhouette of a car behind us, looming in the distance, gaining on us slowly. I pressed down on the accelerator, my heartbeat matching the rhythm of the tires on the road. The car behind us didn't seem to care. It kept closing the gap, the darkness around us pressing in on all sides. There was nowhere to turn off, nowhere to hide. Just the road and the barren desert. The car was right behind us now, close enough that I could make out its shape, but still no headlights. I couldn't see the driver. My stomach twisted into knots as we sped up, but the car matched our speed, sticking to us like a shadow. The tension was unbearable, the silence between us thick and heavy. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, my knuckles white. I didn't dare look in the mirror again, the dread curling in my gut. Then, without warning, the car behind us veered off the road. I saw it disappear into the darkness, swallowed up by the desert. There were no tire marks, no sound. Just gone. I wanted to believe it was over, that we were safe, but deep down, I knew we weren't. The silence that followed was more suffocating than the chase. As the town lights appeared on the horizon, I felt a brief moment of relief. But it was fleeting. Because in that last glance in the mirror, I swore I saw those headlights again, lurking just beyond the edge of sight. It had been 3 days since we left the gas station. 3 days of endless highway, empty motels, and sleepless nights. I thought putting distance between us and that place would ease the knot in my chest, the tension that had coiled itself tight, refusing to let go. But the further we drove, the heavier the weight became, pressing down on me until every breath felt shallow, as if I was still holding something inside, something I couldn't shake. The car felt different. It was the same car, same familiar creaks and groans as it cruised down the road, but now it carried a strange, oppressive silence. My partner had grown quiet too, only speaking when absolutely necessary, eyes fixed on the horizon as though any distraction might let something slip past. I couldn't blame them. Neither of us had mentioned what happened that night. We hadn't talked about the car, the headlights, or the way it vanished. Maybe saying it out loud would make it real. But not saying it left something unspoken between us, thick and heavy, lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow that wouldn't leave. The road stretched out in front of us, straight and monotonous. There was something familiar about it, though we were hundreds of miles away from where it had all started. I kept catching myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those same headlights, flickering on the horizon. But the road behind us was always empty, just as deserted as the land around us. No towns, no cars, nothing. At night, it was worse. I found myself lying awake in unfamiliar beds, staring at the ceiling, heart racing at every creak or gust of wind outside the window. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see that gas station. The way the clerk had looked at me, his cold, hollow eyes. The way the car had followed us, relentless, until it disappeared into the dark. I kept telling myself it was over, that it had been a one-off. A strange, terrifying encounter, sure, but nothing more. But my gut said otherwise. Something wasn't right. On the 4th day, we stopped at another gas station. This one was in better shape. Bright lights, a handful of other cars, the low hum of voices inside. It was a relief, a sign of normalcy, but even that wasn't enough to settle the unease that had taken root in me. As I filled up the tank, I couldn't stop my eyes from drifting to the road behind us. A creeping paranoia had started to settle in. Every car that passed, every set of headlights in the distance felt like a threat, like something was coming, slowly but surely. I went inside to pay, and the clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled at me as I handed her the cash. Her voice was soft, her movements calm, but the moment our hands touched, I felt it again. That same coldness. Not physical, but something deeper, something beneath the surface. The world around me seemed to shift, just for a second, like the ground had dropped out from under me. Her smile never faltered, but her eyes, they were the same as his. I blinked, and it was gone. The normalcy returned in an instant, but my heart was racing. I left the gas station quickly, almost running to the car. As I sat behind the wheel, I realized I was trembling. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that we hadn't escaped. Something was following us, something I couldn't see but could feel, pressing down on me like the weight of all those sleepless nights. We got back on the road, but the silence between us was thicker now, the tension palpable. The landscape around us was changing, too. More barren, more isolated, as if the world itself was shrinking, closing in. Hours passed, and the sun began to sink low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. That's when I noticed it. In the rearview mirror, a glint. Small at first, like a flash of light catching metal. My pulse quickened. I stared, trying to tell myself it was nothing, but it was there. Faint, but undeniable. Headlights. They were far away, barely visible, but they were there, steady. Keeping pace. My breath hitched. My hands tightened on the wheel. I tried to focus on the road ahead, to tell myself it was just another car, just a coincidence. But with every mile, the lights grew closer. And with them, that creeping dread began to build again, inching up my spine. I told myself to stay calm, that it wasn't the same car, that we were safe. But no matter how fast I drove, no matter how many turns I made, the lights stayed with us. Then, just as night fully descended, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. And they were gone. I felt my chest constrict, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I strained to see through the darkness. The road behind us was empty, just like before. No car, no headlights. But I knew it was still there, hiding just beyond the edge of sight, waiting. The hours dragged on, the oppressive darkness closing in. The further we drove, the more disoriented I felt, like we were caught in some endless loop. The road never seemed to change, and every time I glanced in the mirror, I half expected to see those lights reappear, chasing us through the night. At some point, exhaustion took over, and we decided to stop for the night at a small, rundown motel on the side of the road. It was the kind of place you only stay at when you have no other options. The flickering neon sign cast long shadows across the parking lot as I pulled in. I cut the engine and just sat there for a moment, my heart still racing, eyes scanning the road behind us. There was nothing. No movement. No headlights. I tried to convince myself that it was finally over, that we could rest, if only for a few hours. But the moment I stepped out of the car, the air felt wrong again, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I glanced around, searching for the source, but all I saw was darkness. The road, the desert, the empty parking lot. Nothing moved. But as I turned back toward the motel, I froze. Across the lot, in the shadows near the edge of the building, was a car. Its headlights were off, but I recognized it instantly. The same shape. The same car that had followed us, that had disappeared and reappeared, as if it had never really left. My stomach dropped, and every instinct screamed at me to get back in the car, to leave, to run. But my legs felt like they were made of lead, rooted to the spot as the door of the car creaked open. I couldn't see who, what, stepped out, but I knew. They had been following us all along, waiting for the right moment. And now, they were here. In that instant, I realized something chilling. There was never any escaping this. The road had never really been empty. It had always been there. Waiting. I stood there, frozen, staring at the dark silhouette emerging from the car across the lot. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat loud and hollow, filling the silence that had descended over everything. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the night itself was pressing down on me. The headlights remained off, but I could feel the presence of the car, looming in the darkness like a predator stalking its prey. My legs refused to move, the weight of exhaustion and fear holding me in place. The figure stepped out of the car, their movements slow, deliberate. I couldn't make out their face. Just the shape of them, cloaked in shadow. Something about the way they moved made my stomach churn. It was too familiar. Like I had seen this person, this thing, before. I glanced back at the car, thinking for a split second that I could still run. But then I realized something that made the blood drain from my face. My car. It wasn't where I had parked it. The space was empty. My heart seized in my chest. Hadn't I just stepped out of it? Hadn't I left it right there? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. It was impossible, but as I scanned the parking lot again, there was no sign of our car. Just the stranger's vehicle, sitting in the shadows, and the figure moving closer. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We had never left that gas station. All the miles we had driven, the endless road, the motels. They had been an illusion, a twisted loop that kept us moving in circles. The road had never changed because it had never been real. We had been trapped from the moment we stopped for gas, caught in some nightmarish cycle that I hadn't understood until now. And that car, the one following us, it had always been there, just out of sight, pulling us deeper into this endless void. The figure was closer now, almost within arm's reach. My skin crawled as I watched them, my body screaming at me to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. They were rooted to the ground, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. I couldn't make out the face in the darkness, but I knew. Somehow, deep down, I knew who or what this was. The air around me grew colder, and a strange clarity began to settle in. This was the end. There was no escaping it. No more running, no more looking over my shoulder, waiting for the headlights to appear again. The truth had been chasing me all along. We hadn't just stumbled onto a strange gas station. We had crossed a threshold, entered some place we weren't meant to be, and now we were paying the price. The figure stopped just inches from me. My breath caught in my throat, and I finally forced myself to look up into the darkness where their face should be. And then, like a veil lifting, I saw it. My own reflection staring back at me. My face, but distorted, hollow, as if drained of life. My eyes, but colder, empty, filled with nothing but darkness. In that moment, I realized the truth. The car, the road, the gas station. It was all part of the same nightmare, but not one I could wake from. I wasn't being followed. I was following myself, my own fear and paranoia, my own desperate attempts to escape something that had been inside me from the start. The car wasn't chasing us. It was dragging us back, over and over again, to the same point. The figure, my reflection, reached out, and as their hand touched mine, a wave of cold washed over me. My body went numb, my vision blurred. The world around me began to dissolve, the parking lot, the motel, everything unraveling into darkness. I tried to pull away, but it was too late. The truth was already sinking in, wrapping itself around me like a noose. I wasn't going to make it out of this. As the darkness closed in, I realized the worst part. It wasn't the fear, or the chase, or even the cold touch of that figure. It was the knowledge that I had been running in circles all along, trying to escape something that had been part of me from the beginning. There was no other car. No stranger. No way out. The last thing I saw before the world faded completely was the headlights, flickering on in the distance. But this time, they weren't chasing me. They were leading me home. And then, just like that, everything went black. What would you do if you couldn't escape your own nightmare? Hit that like button if this story sent chills down your spine, and let me know in the comments what you think really happened. Subscribe now to catch more terrifying tales, and make sure to turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.